Please.
Don't move. Sit with me so he thinks I'm taken.
The rain had been coming down for maybe 10 minutes when a woman I had never seen before sat down on the bench beside me, slid her arm through mine like we'd done it 1,000 times, and said low and fast, "Please don't move. Sit with me so he thinks I'm taken." I looked at her. Wet hair, a thin denim jacket that wasn't built for a night like this, fear held very still behind a very calm face. And then I looked past her, across the empty street, at the man standing under the awning of the closed pharmacy, hands in his pockets, watching our bench with the patience of somebody who has all the time in the world. And somehow, without a single word of explanation, I understood that this stranger needed me. So I lifted my arm, settled it around her shoulders like it belonged there, and I said, loud enough to carry across the wet and empty street, "There you are. I was starting to think you'd stood me up. That is how I met my wife. Let me back up. My name is Daniel Mercer. I'm 35 years old, and I work as a locksmith in a town near the end of the county line. I spend my nights letting people back into places they've locked themselves out of. Homes at 2 in the morning. Cars in grocery store parking lots. A young mother once, standing barefoot on her own porch with a sleeping baby on her shoulder and no key to her own front door. I'm good at my job, because the one thing I know how to do is stay calm while somebody else is panicking on the wrong side of a locked door. My hands don't shake. They never have. It's the only truly useful thing about being a man who feels everything on the inside and shows almost none of it on the outside. I was at that bus stop because of my father. My dad drove the night bus in this town for 28 years. The last route, the 1140, the one that carried home the people the rest of the world had already forgotten about for the night. The dishwashers. The nurses coming off a double. The kids who'd missed every earlier bus and were trying not to cry about it. He drove that route in a gray jacket that always smelled faintly of motor oil and black coffee, and he knew every regular by name. He used to say his whole job came down to one thing. "Danny," he'd tell me, "I make sure nobody gets left at the stop. That's it. Doesn't matter who they are or where they're going. If they're standing at my stop, they're mine to get home." He died 4 years ago, on an ordinary Sunday. And every year, on the anniversary, I go and sit at the last stop on his old route, the 1140, at the corner of Bell and Ash, just to feel close to him for an hour or two. The route doesn't even run anymore. They cut it 2 years back. So it's just me and an empty bench and a schedule sign that lies about a bus that isn't coming. That's who I was when Norah sat down. A shut-off man, waiting at a stop for a bus that stopped running years ago. Because I'll be honest with you about the state I was in. After my dad died, something in me just quietly switched off. The woman I was with then, her name was Claire, she watched me go somewhere she couldn't follow. And after a year of living beside a locked door, she stopped knocking. She left. And she wasn't wrong to. "You're still here," she told me at the end, standing in a doorway with a box in her arms, "but you left a long time ago, Daniel. You just forgot to tell your body." I didn't argue. She was right. I'd gotten very good at letting strangers back into their homes, and completely useless at letting anyone into mine. Before I tell you how a woman I'd known for 4 minutes ended up being my whole life, let me ask you something. If you believe the best thing that ever happens to you can walk in on the very night you'd stopped waiting for anything at all, do me a small favor and tap that subscribe button, because this channel is full of stories exactly like this one, and I'd hate for you to miss the next. Alright. Back to the rain. The man under the awning was named Vaughn. I didn't know that yet. All I knew, sitting there with a stranger's arm laced through mine, was that her hand was ice cold where it gripped my sleeve, and that whoever this man was, the sight of him had frightened her enough to sit down next to the first stranger she could reach and marry him on the spot. He crossed the street. Of course he did. Men like that always crossed the street. "Norah," he said, stopping a few feet from our bench, and the smile he wore was the kind that's really just a way of showing teeth. "Fancy that. You don't answer 40 texts, and here you are catching a bus." "I'm getting a ride, Vaughn," she said. Her voice was steady. Only I could feel how hard she was holding my arm. "You can go home. His eyes flicked to me. To her arm through mine. To my face, reading me, measuring me. And who's this? And here's the part one still can't fully explain, because I'm not a fast man, and I'm not a liar, and the calm I have is the calm of a man who deals in facts. But something about the way she'd said please, and the way this Vaughn was looking at her like she was a thing he'd misplaced and meant to get back, made me do something I have never done in my life. I put out my hand for him to shake. Easy as anything. Daniel, I said. Her husband. And she's told me approximately nothing about Vaughn, which I'm going to take as a good sign for me and a bad one for you. It's pouring, friend. Whatever this is, it's over now. Go home. I didn't raise my voice. I never do. Vaughn looked at my hand and didn't take it. He looked at Norah. And I watched him do the math that men like him always do, the quiet arithmetic of is this worth it right now, in front of a witness, in the rain. Husband, he said flatly. Since when? Since none of your business, Norah said. He stood there a moment longer, that smile curdling at the edges. Then he said, this isn't over, Norah, in a voice meant only for her, and he turned and walked back across the street, and I watched him get into a dark car half a block down and just sit there. Engine off. Waiting. Norah let out a breath that shook badly at the very end of it. And she did not let go of my arm. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I saw him park and I panicked. You were the only person out here, and you looked, she stopped. You looked like someone who wouldn't be scared of him. He's still watching, I said quietly. In the car. Don't look. Keep your head where it is. I nodded at the empty street. Looks like you're stuck with a husband for a little while. Might as well tell me what I've married into. She almost laughed. It came out wet. And then, because we had a whole rain and a lie to keep standing, and because sometimes it's easiest to tell the truth to a stranger you'll never see again, Norah told me everything. Her name was Norah Ellison. She was 31. And Vaughn was a man she'd dated for a year and a half and left 4 months ago, and who had not, in any way that counted, accepted that she was gone. Everyone thinks I'm exaggerating, she said, staring at the wet pavement. He's charming. He's so charming. Our friends love him. My own brother thinks I'm being dramatic. Vaughn's never once raised his voice or lifted a hand, so there's nothing anyone can point to and say, there, that's the thing. It's just, she searched for it. It's the way he's always there. At the coffee place I go to. Behind me on the road. A text at midnight that just says goodnight so I know he knows I'm home. He never does the one big thing that would make people believe me. He does 100 small ones that only I can feel. So call the police, I said. She shook her head, and here's where it stopped being a simple story about a bad ex. I did, she said. Once. And the officer was very kind and very useless, and he told me to keep a log. So I have a log. Do you know what a log gets you, Daniel? It gets you a stack of nights where nothing technically happened. She turned her hands over in her lap. And there's my brother's wedding in 3 weeks. Vaughn's still invited, because my brother invited him before we broke up and won't uninvite him because that would be, and I'm quoting, making a scene. So I get to spend the next 3 weeks pretending I'm fine, so I don't ruin my brother's wedding by being the sister who couldn't let a nice guy go. She looked at me. So I sit at bus stops in the rain and hope he gets bored. And tonight he didn't. And you were here. I sat with that for a long moment. The rain came down. A traffic light 3 blocks up cycled green to yellow to red for nobody at all. And something in me, the switched off thing, the part that had been dark for 4 years, flickered. Because I knew about being calm on the outside while something enormous went on underneath. And I knew what it costs to have people look right at you and not believe what they're seeing. We waited for the bus. It didn't come, of course. It was never going to come. The 11:40 stopped running 2 years ago, and I knew that, and I hadn't told her yet, because for the first time in 4 years I did not want the next thing to happen. I did not want the bus to come and take her away and turn me back into a man sitting alone at a dead stop. So I let her wait. God forgive me, I let her wait, because the waiting meant she was still here. My father used to drive this route, I heard myself say. 28 years. The 1140. He used to say his whole job was making sure nobody got left at the stop. I looked at the schedule sign, at the time that meant nothing. He died 4 years ago. I come sit here on the anniversary. That's tonight. I've spent those 4 years about as switched off as a person can be and still have a pulse. I turned and looked at her. The bus isn't coming, Norah. It hasn't run in 2 years. I should have told you 20 minutes ago. I didn't, because I didn't want you to leave. She went very still. And then, instead of getting up, instead of the fear coming back into her face, she said, quietly, "Then how are you planning to get home?" I wasn't, I admitted. I walk. It's not far. I just like to sit here a while first. She looked at me for a long time. The rain thinned to almost nothing. Down the block, Vaughn's car still sat dark and patient. "Okay," she said finally. "Then here's what I think, Daniel the husband. I think a man who sits at a dead bus stop to feel close to his father is not the kind of man who's actually switched off. I think the light's still on in there. It's just nobody's knocked in a while." She tightened her arm through mine, and it wasn't fear this time. "And I think, since neither of us has a bus coming, you're going to walk me home the long way, past that car, so he sees exactly nothing worth waiting around for. And then you're going to give me your number, so the next time he parks outside my window, the first person I call isn't the police with their log. It's you." "You've known me for 20 minutes, I said. "I've known him for a year and a half, she said. "I'd rather bet on 20 good minutes than a year of bad ones." So we walked. We stood up off my father's bench, and I kept my arm around her, and we walked the long way, right past Vaughn's dark car, close enough that he could see we were in no hurry, that whatever he was waiting for wasn't going to happen tonight. And I felt his eyes on my back the whole way, and I didn't speed up, and I didn't slow down. My hands didn't shake. They never do. And somewhere on that walk, the strangest thing happened. We stopped keeping up a lie and started actually talking. The way you only can with someone when the pretending is over and the truth is somehow easier. She told me she was a nurse. Nights, mostly, which was half of why the bus stop mattered so much. I told her about the 2 a.m. lockouts, the barefoot mother on the porch. She told me she'd basically raised her younger brother after their dad walked out, which was why she'd sooner swallow glass than ruin his wedding. I told her about the motor oil and the black coffee, the way my father knew every regular by name. By the time we reached her door, she knew I take my coffee the same way he did, black and too strong. And I knew she hummed without realizing it when she was nervous, a little tuneless thing, and that she'd been humming it since the moment Vaughn crossed the street. She stopped on her step. She looked at me under the porch light, rain still bright in her hair. "Whose stop was that, really?" she asked. "You said it like it was a grave." "My father's," I said. "The last stop on his last route. I'm the only one who still shows up for a bus that doesn't run." She was quiet a moment. Then she said, "He'd be glad, I think, that somebody got home safe on his route tonight. Even if the bus didn't come." And I stood on a stranger's step at nearly midnight and felt something in my chest crack open, some door that had been rusted shut since an ordinary Sunday 4 years before. And light came through it. I gave her my number. She gave me hers. I walked home the long way, alone, and for the first time in 4 years the walking didn't feel like the thing I did instead of living. She called me 2 nights later. Vaughn's car, outside her window, engine off. I drove over. I didn't knock on her door. I knocked on his window. I didn't threaten him. I never do. I just leaned down, calm as a man opening a lock, and I told him that a friend of mine at the county courthouse had explained to me exactly what a pattern looks like written down, and that Norah's log wasn't a stack of nothing, it was a map, and that maps get read out loud in rooms with judges in them. I told him the smartest thing a smart man could do was become extremely boring, starting tonight. And I told him I'd be around now. Not going anywhere. And that the small things he did that only Norah could feel, I could feel them too now, and I was writing them down. He moved his car that night. He wasn't at the brothers' wedding 3 weeks later. He'd send his regrets. Men like that fold the moment the room stops being empty. I went to that wedding as Norah Ellison's +1, and a funny thing happens when a woman everyone's decided is being a little dramatic walks in on the arm of a calm, steady man who clearly thinks she hung the moon. The story people have been telling themselves starts to wobble. Her brother pulled me aside by the bar near the end of the night, a beer in his hand and something uneasy in his face, and he said, "She seems really happy. Happier than she was with," and he didn't finish it. And I said, "She was telling the truth, you know. The whole time." And he looked down at his beer for a long moment, and he said, "Yeah. I'm starting to get that." It wasn't an apology, not quite. But it was a door opening. And sometimes a door opening is enough. Nothing happened fast after that. That's how I knew it was real. At 1 month, she'd taught me to sleep through her getting home at 7 a.m. off a night shift, and to leave the porch light on for her without being asked. At 2 months, my coffee mug lived in her kitchen, and the tuneless humming had turned into actual songs, because she wasn't nervous in her own home anymore. At 6 months, I took a day shift contract so my hours would line up better with hers, and my buddy at the shop said I'd changed, that I laughed now, that the lights were back on. At a year, I drove her out to the corner of Bell and Ash, to the dead stop and the lying schedule sign, and I got down on one knee on the wet pavement in front of my father's bench, and I asked her to make the lie the truth for good. She said yes before I'd finished asking. We got married at that bus stop. Just the two of us and her brother and a friend from the shop and a borrowed umbrella. I know it's a strange place for a wedding. But she understood. She'd understood since the first night. Some stops matter more than the bus that's supposed to come to them. I think about that night more than she knows. About the shut-off man I was, sitting at a dead stop to feel close to a dead father, so switched off I could open any lock in the county except the one on my own life. And about the woman who dropped onto the bench beside me and took my arm and said, "Sit with me so he thinks I'm taken," thinking she needed me to save her. Here's the truth I've never told her, and maybe I never will, because some things are better just quietly known. She didn't need saving. Norah Ellison is the strongest person I have ever met. She'd have gotten herself free of Vaughn without me. Slower, harder, alone, but she'd have done it. Chin up, the way she does everything. She didn't sit down next to me because she couldn't stand on her own. She sat down next to me because my father wasn't done. 28 years he spent making sure nobody got left at the stop. And 4 years after he died, on his own dead route, on the anniversary of the day I lost him, he reached out one more time and put the exact right stranger on the bench beside the shut-off shell of his son, and had her take my arm. She thought I was her husband for one rainy night, saving her from the man across the street. She was the one who got me home. If you've ever had a stranger walk into your life on the exact night you'd stopped waiting for anything, the right person, the right corner, the right rain, like something bigger than luck was standing just out of frame, I want to hear about it. Because I don't believe those nights are ever really an accident. Tell me your story down in the comments, and tell me where in the world you're watching from tonight. I read every single one, and it still amazes me how far these stories travel from one lonely bench to another. And be honest with me before you go. If a stranger had dropped onto the bench beside you in the rain and whispered, "Sit with me so he thinks I'm taken," would you have put your arm around her the way I did? Or would you have looked away, kept your head down, and let her face that street alone? There's no wrong answer. There's only the one you'd have to live with. If this story moved you even a little, do me one small kindness. Tap that like button, so it finds the next person sitting alone at their own dead stop, waiting for a bus that isn't coming. Hit subscribe, and turn on the notification bell, because I'm here every week with a brand new story about the kind of love that shows up on the exact night we'd stopped believing it ever would. Get home safe. I'm glad you're here.